Hey, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today's very exciting. We're continuing our series where we interview health, wellness, biohacking, and all the crazy people that I love and want to share with the world. Really selfishly because I just want to learn from them. But I figured I could share it with you guys as well. And today we're interviewing my good friend, Boomer Anderson, who runs a company called Decoded Superhuman, where he helps performers, high performers, executives, entrepreneurs be at their best and use data-driven science to produce those results, like looking at your genetics and then making decisions from that. So Boomer, thanks so much for coming on, and I'm so happy to have you here. I'm so excited that I get the chance to pick your brain in a way that is fun and just like brings value to other people as well. So Boomer, I would like for you to just quickly give us the Reader's Digest version of your story so we can get some context to who you are and how you ended up doing this and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, do I get the full issue of Reader's Digest, or do I just get like a little article?
Little article, just a synopsis, because I know the story is important for me, and what also is more important for me is like the nuggets that come from my curiosity, and so that's what I'm more interested in. But I want to let people know who you are. So yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I fit into that realm that you mentioned earlier of crazy people. So let's get started on that. The idea of performance has been an obsession of mine from a very young age. You think about it when you're younger, academics, athletics, I always wanted to take that to the next level. If you graduated in 2008, particularly 2008 from college with a business degree, you went to work on Wall Street, and that's where I sat and really started my career. I went to work on a particularly, or I guess you can say, eerie day, which was September 15th, 2008, which was the day that Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, AIG gets nationalized, and they say finance changes forever. You could have fooled me because for the next 2 years, I didn't sleep very much. I worked I would sleep 4 to 6 hours a night. But I got sent to Singapore, where at the rightful age of 26, became the head of this financing desk and oversaw 14 different countries and how their governments as well as corporations raise money at a bulge bracket investment bank. This period of my life involved a lot of travel. And eventually, by the age of 30, I got tired of this and decided to resign to become this entrepreneur. Because at that point, Uber was just becoming a thing. And of course, I wanted to start this unicorn app because everybody wanted to start a unicorn app at that point, right? And I thought I was healthy. So I was exercising, sometimes doing CrossFit workouts upwards of 10 times per week. I was following whatever the diet of the day was. And that was, I was an early adopter to paleo, early adopter to keto, bulletproof. I was vegetarian for a day. And, at the age of 30, I'm resigning and the insurance was about ready to run out. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to go get this amazing physical, right? And that physical included something called a calcium score. And at the age of 30, I found out I had heart disease. And heart disease, for anybody listening to this, is the leading preventable cause of death in 2 continents, the European Union, Europe, as well as the United States. And so rather than going to start this unicorn app, I say, hey, let's answer the question how not to die. And this is where things like genetics and all the data come in. Because given my background in finance, I was very comfortable with data. And, you start to uncover there's certain things that genes can tell us about nutrition, sleep, etc. Then you start layering on wearable technology. And you can imagine that the first year after leaving banking, I'm really fixing myself. And over the course of that time, I'm uncovering a lot of new knowledge. I'm speaking to all these experts around the world. This is when I've launched the podcast, really, to have smart conversations with smart people. And, over about a year into this, former colleagues were reaching out to me and saying, like, hey, can you do this for me? Can you really help me optimize myself? Because whether you're fixing disease or trying to optimize performance, there are basic principles that people need to know. And so former colleagues become clients, and that's really how the business got started. So I guess that was a slightly longer than Reader's Digest version, but there you have it.
No, I like it, man. I actually didn't know that about the heart disease thing. I thought you were just dealing with stress and overwhelm and like fatigue and stuff like that.
All of it contributes. It's just, for me, it manifested in heart disease, right? And so it's something that, yeah, it's there. And I'm in the process of reversing that. And that will take some time. But I'm glad I discovered it when I did. Because if not, I was on a fast track for a heart attack at the age of 40.
It's crazy. Yeah, and you and I are not so dissimilar in the sense that we actually have a very similar story. I too, young blood, high achieving, just wanting to create a good life for myself, and went into investment banking, was working those crazy hours, and then just shifted my focus towards marketing, not too long after, and put the same amount of energy into that, and definitely suffered the consequences of overwhelm and stress, and yeah, just not really knowing what I didn't know. And I think the first question I want to ask you is, when you first started getting into this world, where did you start and what did you discover?
So first things first, I was an early participant in the world of quantified self. And this was back when I was in investment banking, because...
Just for the people who don't know, can you tell them what quantified self means?
Sure. So quantified self is essentially using some of these wearable devices, self-tracking, to optimize a certain area of life, or I look at it as an optimizing of life, but technically it could be just self-tracking of any kind. It was started by Kevin Kelly and a guy who's become a very good friend of mine, Gary Wolf, way back when. And I found this area of quantified self to be particularly interesting because I love data, and I love that I could assign data to myself and use that to perform better. Now, in banking, that meant how to solve for the question to do more work, right? And so when I started getting into this, it was just, self-tracking, and things like the Oura Ring didn't exist at this point, but just trying to figure out, okay, if I did X, how would it improve Y? And I really just took it from there. And when I found out I had heart disease, I was like, okay, clearly the experiments were wrong. I was solving for the wrong question, because, when I was in banking, I was like, how do I get less sleep? Well, it turns out sleep is quite an interesting factor. And so when I took the approach of how to fix heart disease, because when I was diagnosed, Kyle, the first thing that the doctor said to me was like, take these pills and come back to me in 5 years. And you're sitting there and you're like, okay, 5 years. You just told me that I have a 95% chance of a cardiac event in my life, and you want me to come back in 5 years? That's a hell of a long time. And look, I don't fault this guy because it's what he was taught, it's what he knows. But when I really peeled back and started approaching this, I had my 23andMe done at that point, and really 23andMe told me, hey, you're 99.9% European. But I started looking behind the data and started looking at the 600,000 lines of raw data that they provide you, and what those meant. And you can go into websites like Prometheus and for $5 find out, roughly where these or what your genes say in terms of these studies. Well, Prometheus is great, but it doesn't really give you any direction on how to read a study.
So I got to ask you, man, because like what you said is just so not normal. Most people, when they get their 23andMe, and let's say they're having health things, they're not just thinking, oh, let me just go analyze all these, thousands and thousands of lines of data and figure out a way to read it. Like, what drove you to do that?
I keep coming back to that moment when I was diagnosed, right? Because I thought I was doing everything right. Had the six-pack, I was running 6-minute miles. I was CrossFitting like crazy. I had all muscle upon muscle, all of this stuff. And then when you say, I've done everything that mainstream media has told me to do, and you still come out with a result that is suboptimal, how do I get to the objective? And the data is where things become objective. And it's the great equalizer, if you will. You take it, you throw it into Prometheus is just a very basic version of something, but you upload it into Prometheus and you can find out some information about yourself. And along the way, you meet mentors. So I got into genetics because I was just looking for a different approach. And along the way, I met people like Dr. Daniel Stickler, who sits in Austin, Texas. You start speaking to proactive cardiologists, and a lot of them start pointing you in directions of things to investigate. Dr. Larry Cresswell in University of Mississippi started pointing me in very different directions than what my cardiologist was telling me in Singapore at that time. And frankly, like all of this stuff was appealing to me, and I naturally gravitate towards data. So frankly, that was the reason why.
Got it. Got it. So then what did you discover with the genetics? And yeah, take us on the journey of like what transpired after that.
So Kyle, you mentioned something earlier that I didn't know about you, about your relationship in investment banking. And talk to me a little bit about what that lifestyle is like. Let's just set the framework for people.
Yeah, the framework is the first day that I came into the office on the job, my manager sat me down next to him. He opened up the drawer of the desk. He grabbed out a full bag of Adderall and slapped it on the desk. And he said, "Study buddies in case you need them, and you'll need them."
That's more helpful than my manager.
That's that's just the culture of investment banking. It's the expectations are really high, and there's a lot of money in the mix. There's a lot of money at stake, and so you're required to work insane hours, and even if you get overtime, like it just doesn't matter because the quality of your life is suffering so much, right?
And suffice to say, like what Kyle and I are engaging in here is just a conversation about the lifestyle. And it's because, the investment banking lifestyle is broadly catered towards a night person. When I started looking at my genes and actually started living in a certain way, I discovered, hey, I'm actually a morning chronotype. And a chronotype is just essentially, are you a morning lark or a night owl? And I am very much a morning lark.
Wow.
And a morning lark living a night owl's life can produce a certain element of dissonance, if you will. And that dissonance can contribute to things like disease. But on top of that, it also reduces performance because, I wasn't living what I was genetically programmed to do. And by going, and you can of course shift this a little bit, but I was living the exact opposite of what I was programmed to do. Now, self-experiment here, I start waking up a lot earlier. I start going to bed a lot earlier. I feel better. I focus better. I do things better. I'm more physically active. I have more energy. Everything is better. That's just one example.
Yeah, you just opened up such a big can of worms for me.
This is like a huge can of worms. We can dig in if you want.
Yeah, so like, tell me then, and tell the viewer what is possible when you start digging into your genes, and like what are the biggest misconceptions that people have that when they don't have the data they're operating with, and then when they do get the data, they could find out that all the stuff that they're doing is completely just not in alignment with what their goals are.
Wow, how much time do we have? Okay, so I like to tell this one in terms of an analogy, right? Have you ever built a house, Kyle?
I have never built a house, no.
Yeah, and neither have I. But one time I was trying to throw together an analogy when I was speaking on stage in front of people, and I just asked the audience, like, "Hey, has anybody here ever built a house?" And there's actually a carpenter in the audience. And if you're building a house, the first thing that you look towards is the blueprint, right? You have to have a plan. And then you go to build the house. And do you imagine like how many times a house is created exactly according to plan? What do you think that guy said?
Never.
You're absolutely correct, right? So there's things that always come into play when you're building a house. There's the type of soil, there's weather, there's material availability, etc. Genetics is like the plant, and where we're sitting now is that final building. That's your epigenome, right? And so that's how your genes have expressed themselves due to environmental factors. But by simply knowing the plan, it can give us direction on how to live our life. It can give us really a strategy by which to operate. So let's take the past 10 years of Huffington Post headlines and see what diet recommendations are actually there. And we can delete Huffington Post if we need to. But that's just an example. And it just changes every single month. You know, this diet works. Paleo is hot. Keto is hot. The Dukan diet is hot. The grapefruit diet is hot, et cetera, right? Genetics give us a path to certainty. And they can tell us where we may have compromised pathways that leads to potential deficiencies of certain supplements. They can tell us whether or not we may lose weight by having a higher carbohydrate diet. They can tell us whether or not saturated fat can contribute to cognitive decline in the future. And that last one affects 1 in 4 people. So if you're listening to this, 1 in 4 people listening to this probably has some sort of genetic variant of ApoE that may contribute to a potential longevity. I call them opportunities rather than issues, because frankly, the thing that you need to change is reducing saturated fat in your diet. So if you're a paleo person, it's probably worthwhile to just investigate this for a relatively little cost and know that that bacon that you're having every single day with your butter coffee is not contributing to something that could be potentially become a longer term issue.
Well, this is huge, dude. So what I want to know is, so I have my 23andMe, right?
Okay.
I did the big one. So it's got everything. How do I take that data? Where do I put it to get the information that you were talking about?
So, okay, let's talk about 23andMe, because 23andMe offers a lot at a very cheap price, and there's reasons for that. They're using your data and developing, really innovating in the field of pharmacogenetics. And I am not necessarily against that at all. I'm not one of these people who I'm not one of these people who is obsessive over privacy. But to answer your question, 23andMe has a health service and an ancestry service. The ancestry service is what I referred to earlier, which will tell you if you're, in my case, 99.9% European. If you get the Health Plus ancestry service, you get additional bonus items, some of which that I personally can't talk about because I'm not a medical physician, but some of which are uniquely identifiable to you and can be of use. Things like ApoE, which is the gene that we just discussed in saturated fat. Yeah. They also look at BRCA, which is the gene which is associated with breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And so that information can be quite useful. But again, still, Health Plus Ancestry is a little bit limited. What is more interesting is the raw data behind it. And that raw data now is over 600,000 lines of single nucleotide polymorphisms. We don't need to get into the definition there, but think of that as just little bits and pieces of information that you can use to really become a higher performer. Now, there are services out there that'll let you do things for free. People like Rhonda Patrick have services that will provide really good information for you in terms of dietary recommendations. There'll be people out there. Well, Prometheus is something that we've already mentioned. I think
and Prometheus is like $5, you said?
Yeah, it was $5. I don't know if it is anymore because it's been a long time since I've gone out there. Let me discuss first. There is a downside to taking this approach in that Prometheus does not weight studies. So there are studies out there that are better than others and are more complete, done better, have randomized control trials in some cases, that kind of study. And you have to have a certain level of knowledge in order to read these studies, understand these studies, and apply them in your life. This is where having somebody do it for you helps. Look, I'm talking my own book here a little bit because we do this as part of the business,
Yep.
but we're able to look at cross sections of data and look at verticals like nutrition, supplements, sleep, hormones, detoxification, muscle composition and movement, and be able to really ask you questions and engage with you in a conversation about what you actually want to accomplish so that we can cater that data so that you can perform in the way that you desire. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's awesome. And for anyone watching, you know, obviously you can see how hyper intelligent Boomer is and how nerdy he is about this stuff. And that's why I love him, you know, and that's why I am such a fan of what he does, because this is stuff that, like, you know, very few people are talking about. And within that section of people who are even talking about it, there's very few people who understand it to the level that he does and are executing in the way that he's executing. So, like, dude, like, thank you so much for just your dedication to this and to health and to performance and to, you know, helping your clients, because this information is just, I know when someone watches this video, they're just going to like clear out their whole kitchen, you know? But you know, what can, like, just an average viewer,
Mm-hmm.
like, what steps should they be taking in order to optimize things, you know, without going super crazy?
Yeah, because frankly, if we're plotting health or performance on a continuum, right? And you say 0, you're over here, you're smoking, you're you're diabetic, you're whatever, and then 100, you are firing on all cylinders. You are a cognitive ninja, as I like to call them. But how do you get along that continuum as far as possible without needing to go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars? Because frankly, you can get a long way with spending very little money. So what are the basic principles? Sleep. You got to sleep well, right? And this is not 6 hours. Like, 6 was a golden number that somebody made up a couple of years ago, but now 97% of the population, plus or minus a couple percent, depending on what you read, needs more than 7 hours of sleep per night, or 7 hours or more. And so first, start to look at your sleep. What are you doing there? I like to then say, how about your stress? And particularly your perception of stress, because stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. Stress can really help you focus very well. But if you're sitting there and saying, oh my God, I'm stressed, I need to stop stressing, and now I'm stressing about stressing, and oh man, there's this meta stress, that's a problem. And we would need to reframe that. And so start to stress well, build resilience, look at how you're breathing. And there's plenty of videos out there on diaphragmatic breathing on YouTube that you can just pick one of those up and you can learn how to breathe properly. And frankly, most Americans do not breathe properly. You can just watch it in the street, by the way. After you've gone from sleep and stress, probably want to talk a little bit about nutrition. Basic principle here: eat real food. More advanced principle here: you don't need grains, you don't need dairy, and you don't really need sugar. Once you get to that point, you're probably feeling pretty good. Now, here's where bioindividualization can come into play. And so taking what we know about you and sort of looking at you as a human and gathering some data. And so all along this path, if you're tracking this information, you're going to start gleaning insights about yourself and knowing, you know, this works for me. It may not work for everybody. I have this sleep routine, and my sleep routine is very different than somebody else's. If you're tracking along the way, so overarching principle, what gets measured gets managed, you will have it already begun the process of bioindividualization. But then you need to start testing, because I'm a big believer in testing and not guessing. And that could be blood tests, which will tell you where you are now. That can be saliva testing, looking at things like cortisol or even your hormones. And that can also be looking deeper in things like the metabolome or your genome, which we already discussed. Because, ultimately my personal view, all of this stuff is worth it because I only think I have one life to live. I only know that I have one life to live at this moment until somebody tells me differently and we're able to upload our brains to a cloud. I'm going to live that life the best way I can.
So last question before we sort of wrap things up. And what I really want to have you share with the viewer is I would love to hear just a quick story about something like a radical change you saw with one of your clients, from getting some genetic information and realizing that some of their habits or some of their rituals or some of the things that they thought were good for them were actually like not so good for them. And then you flipped it and something totally different happened. Do you have an example like that you could share with us?
What field? Any particular field that we want to focus on here?
Any field that's like the most, whatever is the most extreme example you can think of, because that's just fun for me.
Sure. So let's talk about this gentleman. Wouldn't mind me using his name, but you can find the testimonial on the website. He's the CEO of a tech startup here in Amsterdam. And that company 2 years ago was a very different company than it is today. And I'm actually proud that together our work has played a part in that. 2 years ago, the company was going through a bit of a funding struggle. I mean, this happens with tech startups all around the world, right? They're going through funding struggles. They're constantly just sort of maximizing their bank account, overdrafting checks, all of this stuff, right? And so this company was on its sort of shortest fused, last legs, etc. As a result of that, this gentleman who is the CEO of that company went through a panic attack.
Yep.
And you can imagine that somebody who has a panic attack for their first time is kind of spooked. Now, this is a guy who's a serial entrepreneur. He's entered and exited about 4 different companies. And so this is the first time in his life he's had a panic attack.
Wow.
This was shortly before Christmas 2 years ago. He emails me shortly after Christmas and just says, hey, can we get together? He was actually ashamed of what happened and really didn't quite understand why. And so we start digging into things, doing genetics, making very basic steps, things like blocking blue light. And all of a sudden, life gets better. And so let's drill down on that blocking blue light thing, because I think that's very relevant for your audience, Kyle.
Yep.
And if you are a tech entrepreneur, if you're a tech entrepreneur, you will probably end up in front of a computer at some point, suffice to say. I have not seen a tech entrepreneur not be able to use a computer. And you may end up in front of that computer late at night. Well, the blue light produced from that computer, if you have no filter, will disrupt your melatonin concentration. If it disrupts your melatonin concentration by some studies as much as 75%, it will disrupt sleep. You layer on stress on top of that, you layer on a number of different things, and pretty soon your brain is functioning pretty suboptimally. Now, in the case of this gentleman who is running this company, he was on his phone all the time. He had his phone in his room. He was waking up in the middle of the night. He was checking his email late at night. And just by simply instilling something as little as blue light blockers, which right after we get off of this call is about the time when I put on my blue light blockers every day,
Mm-hmm.
began to get better sleep. And the sleep, therefore, was kind of the Archimedes lever, if you will, to better health. And so better sleep through blue light blocking technologies helped him really start to deal with the stress a little bit better. Then we started to take his genetics and we looked at things like, okay, exercise. What's his muscle composition like? And it turns out he is a much better strength and hypertrophy person. So let's get him in the weight room, get him feeling stronger. That helped his self-confidence. And then on top of that, okay, what do we remove in terms of diet? Well, when we looked at his diet, we saw that he had a glutamic acid sensitivity, which could contribute to waking up in the middle of the night. I can spend a moment, if we have it, explaining what that means.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So, okay, you have there's a number of neurotransmitters that you have. Glutamate being your primary excitatory neurotransmitter, GABA being your primary relaxing neurotransmitter. And over the course of the day, you want obviously more glutamate in the morning, you're feeling excited, and at night you want GABA to kick in. For some people, they have a genetic predisposition so that the conversion from glutamate to GABA isn't automatic. And as a result, they may find themselves waking up in the middle of the night. So if you're a high stressed CEO who already doesn't sleep well, how do we remove that glutamate in the case because he had that genetic predisposition? We're removing things like grains, beer, and a few others that late at night would contribute to higher glutamate and would keep him up. And as a result, he continued to sleep better. And so that person then later on, after sleeping better, feeling better, having more self-confidence, guided his company through a Series A where they just raised a couple $1 million at a valuation of 20 million euros. And that's a pretty decent success story that is very relevant to everybody listening here. And a lot of it, I mean, he'll be the first one to talk to you about this. Like, he's extremely happy that he went through the process of and started really focusing on his health, because he's here now as a pretty powerful CEO in Amsterdam, and they're considering, going for Series B, not Bay. That's something.
Like Series B.
Series A is something. I'm gonna talk to Series Bay later. Series B, early next year. So there's a lot of opportunity ahead for him, and it was all because he started focusing on his health.
All right, last question. I know I said that last time, but this is really the last question. We'll tell you about where people can find you. You work with a lot of executives, a lot of high performers. You do a lot of interviews. If you're watching this, you should definitely go check out Boomer's podcast, Decoded Superhuman, on the iTunes store. It's amazing. Boomer gets some incredible guests on there, which I'm definitely going to be asking him for introductions later. So you're asking a lot of questions, and you get asked a lot of questions. And what I really want to know is, what's the question that no one's asking you that they should be? And what does that really mean? What is that?
Wow. You are really good at asking questions for what is the question that nobody's asking you that they should be? So Peter Thiel has this question it's a very interesting one for interviews. And it's, what do you believe that most people will find insane? And the answer I've always found, sorry, let me take a step back here. There's always a solution. And I want people to kind of remember that. You may be stuck. You may have a diagnosis that is not to your liking. You may have, and again, we're just using diagnosis as an example here. You may be faced with tasks that you don't want to do. There's always a solution. You can be experiencing overwhelm, and then you can speak to a guy like Kyle here, and he can tell you about systemizing your business, and all of a sudden that overwhelm falls away and you're starting to scale a lot faster. There's always a solution.
Yeah, cool. That's beautiful, man. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions. Shout out to Tony Robbins, and our mutual friend Skip Kelly with the most beautiful question. So Boomer, thank you so much for taking the time. And where can people find more of you? Where do you want to send them? And
Sure. Look, if you go to any social media channel and put in Decoding Superhuman, that's me. That's Instagram, that's LinkedIn, where I'm probably most active. That's Facebook, etc. We do have a YouTube channel where we just post all the podcasts. The podcast itself, you can go to decodingsuperhuman.com/podcast. There's over 120 different episodes with people to the likes of David Allen, who invented the Getting Things Done methodology, to Stephen Gundry, to a whole bunch of other people. Kyle will get you on there soon. Yep. And so if you're interested in performance, Decoding Superhuman provides a lot of resources for you. And check it out. Let me know what you think. And if, Kyle, we can provide a link where people can book calls and things directly
Yeah, I'll put everything in the description. You guys should definitely check Boomer out. He has my highest endorsement. And yeah, like I hope you guys got amazing, amazing value out of this. I know I'm actually leaving this interview with more questions than answers, but I think that's a good thing because that means your awareness is rising. And we want to be aware of the things that we don't know so that we can question more and so that we can get the answers that we need. And I think Boomer is a walking testament to what that really means, which is asking deeper questions and saying, well, how do we be objective about this? How do we get the data? How do I figure out what the solution is? And drilling down to the point where he actually did. And he's well on his way to achieving probably more than he ever set out to do. And I'm just so grateful to call him a friend and so happy that he took the time to share with us. So without further ado, we'll end this interview. And thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you in the next one. And take care.